You are now listening to P.A.R. That's People Activity Radio.
If you do not understand white supremacy, what it is and how it works, everything else that you understand will confuse you.
The hunt is on. And you're the prey.
We're traveling through another dimension. A dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition. And it lies between the pit of one's fears and the summit of one's knowledge. You are now traveling through a dimension of imagination. You just crossed over into the Twilight Zone.
Will Smith is moving the production of his new film Emancipation from Georgia to Louisiana. This is to protest the state's new voting laws. The decision will cost Georgia an estimated $15 million. Several companies and organizations are retaliating against those new voting laws. They crack down on ID checks while voting and limit absentee ballots.
Will Smith's new movie, Emancipation, opened in select theaters this weekend. But perhaps the biggest news was that Smith made the media rounds. These were his first appearances after slapping comic Chris Rock at this year's Oscars. Here, Smith is speaking to a reporter at Fox 5 in Washington, D.C.
My deepest hope is that my actions don't penalize my team, that the power of the film would open people's hearts.
Smith is the latest and perhaps most high-profile recent example of a celebrity trying to win back the public's support after a damaging scandal. Other stars seem to have been less successful. Here to talk about how modern celebrities work their way back from controversy is NPR TV critic and media analyst Eric Deggans. Hey, Eric.
Hi.
So, Eric, Will Smith stayed out of the media for months after this year's Oscars, and now he's been out there promoting his new movie. So, to start here, two questions. First, what is he trying to do here? And second, is it working?
Will Smith is executing a pretty standard and frankly effective return to the public. You know, he'd been keeping out of media, but with Emancipation's release, he appeared for a high-profile interview in a friendly venue. He talked over the scandal last week with Daily Show host Trevor Noah, who admitted that he's Smith's friend. And then he hit the red carpet and a few other friendly media outlets. And he emphasized how he hopes that audiences disregard the scandal for the sake of his coworkers. And that's kind of a common strategy for big-name celebrities in trouble. You disappear for a while, you talk over the controversy with a friendly interviewer, and then you return to public events and kind of act as if the situation is mostly behind you.
Okay, so in recent years, we've seen a number of celebrities face public scandals which damage their image. Some seem to have come back from those problems more quickly and completely than some others. Do you have a sense of why that is?
Well, I think one important question is whether the celebrity is generally judged to be at fault and have they sufficiently atoned. Now, think about Johnny Depp's civil domestic violence case, for instance. His trial revealed enough conflicting information in his fight with his ex-wife Amber Heard that fans could maybe feel comfortable taking his side. But I think the jury's still out on whether Hollywood will bankroll another big movie with him as the star. Now, I think it also matters whether or not there's a sense that the celebrity will get in trouble again in the same way. And if the celebrity can make the case that it was a one-time mistake, like Smith is doing right now, I think that allows fans to be a little more forgiving.
We've seen a number of celebrities lose their careers when they were facing allegations of harassment and abuse in the wake of the Me Too movement. Has anyone created a pathway back to mainstream acceptance after scandals like this, which became national movements?
I don't think we've seen anybody fully rebuild their career among those who are facing serious, substantial allegations of harassment and abuse in recent years. But comic Louis C.K., he seems to be trying. I mean, in 2017, the New York Times reported on 5 women who accused him of sexual misconduct. He admitted it was true, and he saw his career mostly disappear. But now he's resumed stand-up comedy tours. He released a film. He won a Grammy Award this year for Best Comedy Album. He seems to be doing these projects that speak directly to his fans. And so he's connecting with people who still like him, and they'll pay to access his work.
All right, so getting back to Will Smith here, I have to ask, do you think this strategy is going to help him rescue his new film, Emancipation?
I think that's going to be tough to judge. Apple TV doesn't release much information on viewership. I've seen the film. It's a really well-made epic, but it depicts a lot of violence, torture, and death during the Civil War, and some audience members might not want to see that. I do think that Smith has rescued his personal image somewhat, but he's going to need to avoid trouble in the future, and some former fans may never fully forgive him.
That is NPR TV critic Eric Deggans. Eric, thank you.
Thank you.
The movie Emancipation is out today on Apple TV+.
I heard it myself. Slaves are free. Free.
Will Smith plays an enslaved person in Louisiana, hearing of the Emancipation Proclamation's promise of freedom. Smith and other enslaved people flee toward that promise, but what they find behind the Union Army's lines challenges their ideas of a benevolent North. This is the first movie Smith has appeared in since he slapped Chris Rock at the Oscars. And for more, we're joined by NPR TV critic Eric Deggans. Hi, Eric.
Hi.
So after what happened at the Oscars, does this movie put Will Smith back on the map?
Good question. Will Smith is one of these guys who always tries to make an event out of every movie that he does. The event part of this film is that he's portraying this person who he's part of a classic photograph, an enslaved person who shows his back to the camera, and you see just acres and acres of scars along his back. It's a well-known photo. And so they decided to build a film around, well, what if we took that guy's life story and made it into a film? So Will plays that guy. And it's interesting. I mean, it's kind of a weird aside, but he originally considered playing the lead role in Django Unchained, and it's a similar character in that this is an enslaved person, but he somehow manages to overcome all of these things. He's almost like a Superman in a way. He eludes the people who are trying to track him, and he somehow knows exactly what to do in every instance to outwit the people who are trying to oppress him. And it's shot with this, in a way, it's beautiful, even though it's brutal. They vividly depict how the enslaved people are treated, but they also have these very beautiful shots of the environment that they're in, and so it's an interesting contrast. It's an interesting film, but I'm not sure it's the kind of film that is going to put Will Smith back at the center of the film business in the way that maybe he wants to be.
Well, let's listen to a clip. Will Smith's character is a little shocked when he reaches the Union Army. He doesn't quite find the freedom he expected. Here he is with a Union officer.
Am I not free? Just keep yourself steady. Technically, while you're here, you're contraband. Stolen property. Lincoln say I am free. Oh, he did. Well, that's a good thing.
Is this movie challenging some convenient historical narratives?
Well, I guess it depends on how much you know. I mean, one of the issues that has always sort of plagued America is that people don't know enough about this time. They don't know enough about the details of the Civil War and how the North had its own complex and sometimes disappointing take on how to treat Black people, folks who were born free and folks who were freed from slavery. So there are going to be people who will say, we know this story. I mean, it's not like this history is particularly hidden, but again, I'm sure for some people it will be something of a revelation.
It's hard to watch. I mean, let's be frank. You use the word brutal. What do you say to folks, particularly Black folks, who just don't want to keep seeing the horror of slavery in media year after year after year?
Frankly, I think that's the movie's biggest challenge. This movie has a lot of pain in it. There's a lot of visceral depictions of Black people being victimized. And it also has this weird thing that I've seen also in Django, where there's one enslaved person who seems to, be able to resist. He's always defiant in ways that don't make sense. Other characters get killed for showing the same level of defiance, but for some reason he's preserved. and he manages to overcome everything in a way that no other black person around him does. And I think, to me, that's one of the problems with movies like this, is that, they show that there's, if you can just find the courage inside yourself to stand up to these people, then somehow you survive this brutal system that has, unfortunately, very effectively oppressed and violated people for centuries. So part of that is what bothers me, but I think what would bother a lot of people is they're just tired of seeing black people subjugated and in pain and tortured for hours in movies.
Mm-hmm.
Because we've seen you everywhere. I mean, you've been everywhere in the world. Like you say, Bhutan, you traveled the Middle East and Africa. And where are you going next? South Pole?
South Pole, yes.
That's a real thing?
Yes.
But why?
Why?
Yeah. Like, what are you hoping to discover there?
So we're
that black people don't like the cold? What are you doing? Why are you there, Will?
No, so the show is, I don't know if I'm supposed to be announcing it yet, but the show's called Pole to Pole.
Okay.
So we're going from the South Pole to the North Pole and all the stops along the way. And we are it's called Other People's Wisdom. So we're seeking the wisdom. There are people who live at the South Pole. They're researchers. So we're going there. We're going to talk to them.
Right. All the scientists. All the scientists. Basically, they say like the world's knowledge is stored at the South Pole.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
So you got me. You making me cry already.
When you talking about the South Pole?
No, yeah. Talking about. The South Pole is just such a. When I think about all that cold,
I'm surprised you're awake, man.
The guy who discovered the South Pole is named Will Smith.
For real?
Yep, that's true.
You said that, so I don't even know if you're lying right now. You said that so convincingly.
No, it's true. It's true. Somebody can Google it. Google it.
It is gripping. It's not glamorizing because it is the story of how, the Union is moving, and people start hearing whispers of Lincoln has declared that, slavery is abolished. He's freed the slaves. Yeah. But then you see how many people haven't received that news, and you see how that news doesn't change everybody's lives overnight.
Yeah, so the emancipation was January 1st. Right. And slaves weren't free until June 19th. So the period of emancipation.
Right? 1865, I think.
Yeah, 1865, yeah. So January 1st, slaves were free, but the South refused to allow the slaves to be free. So the enslaved people started trying to run to get to Lincoln's army. And in Baton Rouge is where Lincoln's army was from this place in Louisiana. So it's about that period where the slaves were free, but they weren't being freed. So it is a beautiful.
When I think it's one of the, he's leading one of the battalions and he talks to your character,
absolutely.
right? He's like a general commando and he says to your character, he says, I was born free. And he says, we're allowed to own houses, we're allowed to do this, we're allowed. And your character says to him,
if someone must allow you to do it, are you really free?
Right.
And this film, what's really interesting about it is it centers on faith. And the power of faith, to be able to endure anything, and this character is just what he had to endure and what he had to survive. Only God could, make a man, when you look at those marks on his back, only God could make that possible, and there he talks about a period in doing the research. He talks about he was whipped into a coma, and he was in a coma for 3 months, and he said that he met God while he was in the coma. And when he came out, he believed in a way that he had never believed before. And I learned the difference between faith and revelation. Right? So faith is one thing. When you have to have faith. I'm not crying to my eyes. I just got tired. I got airplane eyes.
You've been on a plane for 30 hours.
I got airplane eyes. But the difference between faith and revelation, right? That he walked in the world with a knowledge of the divine, with a knowledge of God that was just something I desperately wanted to understand and explore.
Yeah, I mean, you watch the film, you wonder, it's one of those movies where you watch it and you go, this is harrowing, this is gripping, it's wild, it seems unbelievable.
Yeah.
And then you see the images of the real person and your mind cannot comprehend that it was possible for this to happen to a human being and that they actually exist. It's a story that, that goes beyond everything. And I'd love to know, like, in the telling of the story, beyond faith, beyond revelation, what is the biggest thing you took away from it? Because it's interesting, I get what your daughter was saying. Do we need another slave movie?
Yeah.
And I understand what you're saying about it being a freedom movie. But I feel like each story has a different lesson.
Yes.
Because it's a movement, it's a revolution, it's a quest for freedom. What do you think was the biggest lesson you took away from the story?
I think that, as an actor, anytime you go into these characters and you go this deep into these roles, it changes something about you. You understand something that you didn't understand before. And I guess the major thing that came through for me with Peter is the power of the direction of love, right? So he's trying to get back to his family, and that comprehension of love and how love actually is a superpower. When you can fill your heart with that kind of love, it's a propulsion that is unlike any other thing. It's stronger than fear, it's stronger than hate, is stronger than tired, It's like when you can really latch into and fill your heart with love in a way, it really is shield and armor unlike anything that exists.
I love that. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Inbound to immediate shelter. This is not a drill.
Esto es una emergencia.
Reaction notification message. This station has interrupted its regular program at the request of During this emergency, most stations will remain on the air, providing news and information to the public in a time area.
Today it's time to stop singing and stop swinging.
All broadcasters cable system shall transmit its emergency action notification message.
We are coming to get our check.
You are now listening to P.A.R. That's People Activity Radio. And I'm your host, JohnGHorse. Welcome. You have found your family in a peaceful place. P.A.R. is a family-friendly information distribution program seeking to inform non-white people, in particular, black classified, and assisting in counter-racist codification. Yes, indeed. Go on, let this thing sizzle in your spirit. The energy, the ambiance is right and exact.
P.A.R. is a family-friendly information distribution program dedicated to creating less confusion for people subject to non-white and particular black classification. Less confusion with the ultimate goal of solving problems. Replace the system of racism, white supremacy with a system of justice, immediately.
Replace the system of racism, white supremacy with a system of justice. Immediately. Yes, indeed. Let's get at. Yes, indeed. I'd like to take this time to acknowledge and give thanks to all the hard-working, law-abiding, blue-collar, John Henryism practitioners, subject to non-white, in particular, black classification, who has taken the time to dig into their pockets, their wallets, their purses, and distributing all spare pennies, nickels, and dimes that they have had to offer. And I'd like to say once again, much appreciated.
JohnGHorse's Cash App is $JohnHorse, HORSE. Feel free to donate if you feel this program is constructive and worth your time.
Feel free to donate if you feel this program is constructive and worth your time. Where do we begin? Where do we begin? As always, the question. And this is P.A.R. People Activity Radio, and I'm your gracious and humble host, JohnGHorse. You have indeed found your family in a peaceful place. Let me turn down the music so I can get into this commentary. And the title of today's episode is Will Smith's Emancipation Film Review by yours truly, JohnGHorse. One more time, Will Smith's Emancipation Film Review by JohnGHorse. And I know you're gonna ask old John G, why are you endorsing, reporting on, promoting another slave movie, old John G? And that is a legitimate question. And you know how old John G likes to take the long route to the data. So I gotta tell a story on how old John G even found himself watching this movie. Because I gotta be honest, I ain't want no part of this movie or anything coming out of Hollywood that had anything to do with the institution of slavery in the United States of America. How did I come to that conclusion? Well, trial, error, and trauma brought me to that conclusion, and I think it was a series of events. Two films that come to mind that had me come to the conclusion of I'm done, I'm out. I'm tired of being ambushed, pummeled, beat down for 2 hours plus when dealing with Hollywood in particular, but in the institution of slavery, Hollywood, man, they just run circles around non-white people, in particular, people subject to black classification. And I think one of the last films that I knowingly, deliberately watched, and I knew that it was involving the institution of slavery, was a film produced by our beloved sister, our beloved fellow victim, Oprah Winfrey. And I believe the title of the film was Beloved. And I'm trying to draw memories of what the synopsis was, but basically it was the horrors of slavery, the effects of the trauma received by people subject to black classification. And the trauma was so bad, and I hope you folks ain't watched the movie because it's finna be a spoiler. The trauma was so bad till the main character, our beloved Oprah Winfrey, when giving birth to her kids, one of her children, she slit her throat. She ain't wanted to deal with the terror that was sure enough gonna come being black classified under a system of chattel slavery in these United States. And the scenes and the images produced in that film alone, I was exhausted. I was I was worn down. I was traumatized. And I said, you know what? I'm done. I'm out. Scrub my hands together. Never again. I ain't watching none of these films because there's no payoff. There's no payoff. All it is Negro trauma drama, which seems to be a delicacy for people who classify themselves as white, and we believe in the system of racism, white supremacy. Now, that's either true or it's not true, and I am specifically speaking about the institution, the industry of Hollywood. Really ain't nothing constructive coming up out of there, especially for non-white people, in particular people subject to black classification. All you're gonna get is the minstrel blackface caricatures. If you are a fan or if you are a follower of my content, you can scroll down to my first episodes. My first episodes, I went in heavily on the industry of Hollywood, minstrelsy, blackface, anti-black caricatures, the whole 9 yards. If you find that to be something of interest, I would recommend looking at some of my earliest videos regarding that topic. And around 2003, I believe, when YouTube had start popping, 2002, 2003. I could be error. Old John G's getting old, so sometimes this stuff is blurry and foggy. And I'm coming from the top of the dome right now, so if you want to fact check me, you can do Googles while I'm talking. But around the early 2000s is when the YouTube platform got popping. Nobody knew what it was until it came on the scene, and we were just figuring out what it was. But this YouTube thing had this algorithm, and at the time, when going on the YouTube platform, old John G was a connoisseur of blaxploitation film at the time. I'm less confused now, but at that time, I was a little bit more confused. And I was under the impression that this was organic culture of people subject to black classification. But, you live a little, you learn a little, and that was the furthest thing from the truth. But that's neither here nor there. I'm speaking about this time period because the algorithm would always send me, because I would consume the Shafts and the Big Payback and the Hammers, all these films, and they would occasionally send me these old slave movies made in the 60s and in the 70s. I remember one of them starring Ken Norton, one of the boxers that fought against Muhammad Ali. I forget the title of that movie, but if you look up Ken Norton, you look up his filmography, you'll see what film I'm talking about. And I watched that. And this was after I vowed not to watch slave movies again. But the thing was, I didn't know that there was plenty of content made in the 50s, 60s, and 70s regarding the institution of slavery. Now, when the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the politically correct game wasn't popping back then. So you was getting straight, no chaser, clean as a whistle, racism, stomp down, white supremacy in these films. And it was almost like a train wreck. I couldn't stop watching them. Again, going against my boycott, I became intrigued by this culture of very elaborate, detailed, documented and verified historical pieces coming out of the industry of Hollywood. Which brings me to a film that got sent to me by way of the algorithm. The YouTube algorithm, that is. That being said, there was a film titled Goodbye, Uncle Tom. At the time, I didn't think it was going to be any harm in watching this film because at that time I was actually reading Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. So I thought, oh, this is interesting. And it was a long movie, 2+ hours, almost 3, if I'm not mistaken, from memory. If you want to fact check me, please feel free to do your Googles. Let's move on. But this film, Goodbye, Uncle Tom, was not written in screenplay form. It was almost a performative, scripted docudrama, for the lack of a better term. They would have these scenes of antebellum slavery, and they were showing every aspect of the institution of slavery. When you're talking breeding farms, they showed breeding farms. You're talking incest, you're talking rape, men and women. You're talking sexual trafficking, men and women, heterosexual and homosexual scenes. And these, at the time, I thought was actors and actresses. I was thinking, why on earth would they volunteer when they see the script to perform some of these scenes in this disgusting portrayal? Well, I guess there is no glorious way to portray the institution of slavery, but this particular presentation was extremely terroristic, for the lack of a better term. Now, the film was out of Italy. And an interesting fact about this film that I found out later was those were not black actresses and actors, so to speak, in the traditional form. What the directors and the producers did out of Italy, they went to Haiti and developed a relationship with then President Papa Doc. I'm sorry, I don't got his full name, but he's quite popular in Haitian history. Papa Doc actually made them national dignitaries, and he said, y'all are free to film wherever you want on the island, however you want, and you can use anything you want, including our residents. Now, I assume that Papa Doc got cut some tangibles in a check or a perpetual check for this particular production. I don't know the politics and the economic angle on this, but what I thought was actors were actually third world Haitian citizens being exploited in the most vile, disgusting piece of cinema that I have ever seen up to that date in my life. And this is around 2007, 2008. Now, for research purposes, if you go and investigate and watch for yourself to see what old John G is saying, I'm not putting respect on the disgusting nature on the film. So if you want to see what it's all about, all I'm going to tell you, viewer discretion is advised. Viewer discretion is advised. But after being traumatized by Goodbye, Uncle Tom, I scrubbed my hands together again in 2007, around 2008, and said, I'm out. I don't care what they do. They're never going to get me to watch another one of these disgusting displays portraying itself as artistic cinema. Never again. And what wound up happening is, once I started to be very cognizant and aware of the shenanigans of the entertainment industry, I became disappointed time after time at all time. I'm watching a Disney film. I'm squirming in my chair, walking in and out of the room. I'm watching a comedy film. I'm getting disgusted looking at overt anti-blackness. Just a grumpy, bitter existence. If you want to look at some type of drama under the system of racism, white supremacy, when you are conscious of what's actually taking place, when you have self-respect, when you understand history, when you ask questions and you understand the definition of words and how wordplay and imagery and caricature all mixed up into what we think is art is actually warfare against those of us who are subject to non-white, in particular, black classification out of all the entertainment industries around the globe, but in particular, the industry that we know as Hollywood. So to protect myself, I developed a ferocious appetite for non-fiction literature. In particular, any documented and verified literature that would give me any information of my ancestors or non-white people, in particular black classifieds, who resisted and countered the warfare that is waged and pummeled upon their heads, our heads, throughout this experiment that we call the United States of America, which naturally brings me to the Emancipation generation, I like to call them. In the 1800s, early and mid 1800s, especially around the 1850s and 60s, reading about what the ancestors was doing, regardless of this colonial slavery institution, the things that they did to remove themselves from terroristic onslaught of the colonial powers. And it's tons of documented and verified evidence, but in particular, when you get to the Civil War, which was caused by the ancestors raising hell for over a century, which was crippling the economy of the United States, and it was not logical and practical to keep trying to maintain a war, an ongoing war, meaning the institution of slavery was an ongoing war state. You can't protect yourself from outside entities if you're trying to protect yourself from inside entities. So all that raising hell and running amok, and I'm not going to get into the detailed events of the ancestors, kind of put the Union in a situation where, hey man, we got to get up out of this, man. We got to go into the Industrial Revolution, man. Everybody else is building while we sitting around here running after all these slave revolts and slave rebellions, trying to protect y'all so-called property. Something got to give, which brings me to 1860, 1861, 1862, 1863. Emancipation Proclamation, the Union versus the Confederacy. And I just have became consumed and enamored, and just I can't get enough of the information of the ancestors during this time, men, women, and children, and elderly. The sacrifice, the gallantry that was put forth to get our ancestors off them killer squad plantations. Really didn't have nothing to do with self-proclaimed white supremacist Abraham Lincoln. But I'm not gonna get into that. Let's move on. So, John G, why are you promoting, or why are you talking about this film, Emancipation? Well, I saw the trailer, fellow black classifieds. And when I saw the trailer, there was a photo that's a famous photo of a ancestor, took a photo with a bunch of markings on his back. In the film, he goes by the name of Peter. And Peter is on a Louisiana plantation, and understanding history, I understand that I believe it was Baton Rouge was taken by the Union Army, and word had got to the nearby black classified slaves that if you got to Union territory, you would be free, and we would then put a gun up in your hand, and you can assist us in quelling or squashing this Confederate rebellion. This is what was happening. These are the stories that are missing in the consciousness of those of us subject to black classification and descend from United States slaves. We have been beat down, pummeled with the whooping for 2 hours, the whooping in school, the whooping wherever you looked, all you heard about was some whooping to it. You ain't want to hear nothing about that mess. I don't want to hear nothing about that mess because I don't know nobody in my family, friends, loved ones, in the communities where we find ourselves that's going to take some whoopings. What was wrong with my ancestors taking all those whoopings? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't compute. You don't relate to it. Hell, even your mama, you running into the house. Boy, what you running into the house every day for? You scared? You running from somebody? Where they at? Your mama, your uncles, your cousins gonna send your behind back out there. Don't you be running up in here. Go and put in work. And it wasn't about a win or a loss. If you was part of the family, you wanted respect on your name. You ain't gonna be the one to be pushed around, putting shame on the family's name. That what was it was about. Wasn't about the win or the loss. It was about the heart to fight. No matter how insurmountable the odds were. That's what I was taught when I was a little kid in the community from my family members. I didn't know nothing about no taking no whoopings. So how am I going to school listening to some curriculum talking about some submission whoopings? That's not what I see in my environment. And my inner spirit always understood it was something wasn't right about that. I wasn't detached, but I was just very suspicious of all those messages I was getting from the dominant society. You know, I had uncles that were born in the early 1900s because my grandmother was the baby. She was born in 1920, so she had uncles, she had brothers and sisters that was older than her, some of them which was born in the late 1800s. This is true. And, you know, my uncles would always ride around with their tools on them. And I would visit my uncles out in the country part of Florida. They would take me, you know, to do rites of passage things. And I would always ask my Uncle George, which was my grandmother's big brother. She was born in 1920, so he possibly could have been born in 1910, that early. I say, Uncle George, and I'm around about 5 or 6. Uncle George, why you always got your tools on you at the time? Why you always got your pistol and your rifle on you? He said, because you never know when them folks gonna act a fool. I didn't know what he was talking about then, but I know what he's talking about now. And that is what type of culture he came from. They was in the backwoods. They was in the backwoods where it was a mono toe-to-toe thing if law enforcement came in there. It was a mono toe-to-toe thing if antagonistic suspected white supremacists wanted to come in there. A lot of My family members that lived in the backwoods, they didn't deal with white folks like that. White folks didn't come up in them woods where the black classifieds was. I would witness this, but I was too young to understand what I was actually witnessing until I started opening the pages and the text of how our ancestors formed maroon societies and communities outside of the grid of white terror domination. I didn't realize I was looking at survival rafts and or black town communities. And if you're gonna have a black town community or a survival raft, the price for that is you're willing to die to defend it. That's the mentality from which I come from. Those are the references that was always in my spirit. That's why I would be squirming in my chair, watching films, squirming in my chair, watching the Eyes on the Prize documentary, squirming in my chair, listening to teachers tell me about the whooping my folks took. I didn't know nothing about no whooping. I was always witnessing counter racist, ready to ride. Family members, elders, ancestors, whatever you want to call it. Which brings me back to the Will Smith's movie. When I saw that picture of the ancestor with the markings on his back, I understood through history that he was actually an individual who did exist. Now, I'm not going to say that the movie was 100% factual. I understand that the movie was based off of his existence. And there had to be a screenplay written about his existence. And the writers of the film decided that they were going to show him as a father of a family in a home with a father, mother, children intact. So on a plantation, but intact. Film starts off, as they all usually do. He's being taken to a hard labor camp because at the time during the Civil War, black classifieds were forced to build railroads, dig ditches, do a lot of the manual labor for the Confederate Army. Because they were enslaved. They were being leased off by the owners. And in this particular scene, when he was being taken from his family to go into this hard labor camp, they wasn't happy. It was a hard scene. It was the usual Negro trauma drama. But something happened in this particular scene. When they were grabbing Will Smith away from his family, I think he hit one of the suspected white supremacist overseers with a 1-2. Then it was a scuffle. Some form of masculinity and resistance. A little smidgen. But highly unusual for the institution of Hollywood. The family unit, the love for the wife and the mother and the father. The children all together in the home. A smidgen of stuff that you usually don't see in these type of movies. But the reason why I was watching it is because I knew eventually this individual was going to get to union lines, and I wanted to see how Will Smith was going to depict. I wanted to see how the writers was going to depict once Peter got to the union lines, got his gun in his hand and his uniform on. How'd that look? Are we going to see some war scenes with what our ancestors was doing in the field of battle? Because there's Medal of Honor after Medal of Honor. There is no greater number of Medal of Honors for black classifieds, people subject to black classification in the United States military, that is greater than the Medal of Honors earned by our elders, our ancestors in the Civil War. It's true or not true? Please Google that. Now, what the hell was they doing so great that self-proclaimed white supremacists on the North and the South had to acknowledge the gallantry of our ancestors during the Civil War? That's why I was watching. That's why I saw the trailer Will Smith had on the Union uniform. He had a gun in his hand, and I had to watch. I wanted to see. And yes, there was Negro trauma drama. Yes, there were horrors of slavery. Yes, they show all the cruelties outside of straight up and down rape, which I appreciated. But it was hinted, and it was in your window. But they didn't take you down that road. And men and women got raped during slavery. Don't get it twisted. Let's move on. But the fight scene was fulfilling. The brothers put in some work. And the main character, not only did he live, he was able to overcome the antagonist. The antagonist was taken off the planet. And he went back to go get his family off of that terror squad plantation. Now, I've been begging, I've been hooping and hollering. Anybody who know me and sits down with me to break bread, I would always be talking about, man, you should know the stories of the ancestors who got up off the plantation, got tooled up, then returned back to the plantation to put in work. The movie wasn't about that, but in order to tell this story, Will Smith had to show that aspect, and I will say this, one of the greatest warriors of this Civil War area subject to black classification was an ancestor by the name of Andre Calioux. Andre Calioux. That is A-N-D-R-E. I hope I spell his last name right. It's some type of French last name. C-A-I-L-O-U-X. I say this because please research Andre Calioux. See, we hear stories about Daniel Boone and John Henry and Jack and the Beanstalk, but Captain, let me put respect on his name, Captain Andre Calioux was a real-life, true warrior legend. And it is an indictment on the United States why there are not memorials and statues and monuments depicting his image and those who followed in his footsteps. You understand me? The way people talk about Michael Jordan, oh, he's this, and be slobbering all over Michael Jordan, that's the only thing that I could describe as the adoration that should be had for Captain Andre Calioux. And I gotta admit, fellow black classifieds, in this movie, Will Smith had Andre Calioux in the movie. If you don't know history, you don't even know who you're looking at. You don't know what you're looking at. But if you know history, I know history. I got choked up. And my beloved life partner, my attempted wife, looked at me and said, "Are you choked up?" And what you talking about? A little something in my eye. But I got choked up because this is only the tip of the iceberg. Am I saying Will Smith should be taunted for this or taunted for that? No, I'm just giving credit for what credit due. Will Smith, on behalf of old John G., I'm speaking for myself. If you don't want to subject yourself to it, don't do it. But those of you who understand the sacrifice, the gallantry, the bravery, the fortitude that our ancestors, men, women, and children had to have to get themselves up out that situation, there is no way that this particular film disrespects that. That's what I will say. And those of you who are less confused and you're boycotting it, I respect your position. But those of you, if there are any of you out there that covet the legacy of the emancipation generation, hold on. If there's any of you who covet the legacy of the emancipation generation, I would highly recommend researching these individuals that the movie is about, researching the events that surrounds and forms the environment, because there's a lot of stuff going on. But Black Classifieds was about the business of putting in work while everybody else was doing all the hemming and hawing. And the work that we put in was the reason why there is a such thing called the United States today. Now, that's either true or it's not true. And before I let you get up out of here, I have to play the scene that had old John G. choked up. Won't mean nothing to you if you don't know who this person lived. It was really here. Without further ado, Captain Andre Calioux.
All of us ran here. But as of now, no more running. Billy Yank and Johnny Reb, they fight for money and power. We fight for something bigger. We fight for freedom. Not to prove something to some general. Freedom. Freedom for you. Freedom for the man next to you. Freedom for the people back in the fields. We will not ask for freedom. We will not wait for freedom to be handed to us. We will take freedom. Native Guard! Forward! March! Left, 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 right, left, 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 right, left, left, left.
And there you have it. Captain Andre Calioux. Will Smith's Emancipation Film. Straight, no chaser, bars. And I have to give old Will Smith and the director, screenplay writer, and all the actors involved a salute. Wasn't no caricature bad guys, wasn't no scuffling and shiftless Negroes. It was just the most real depiction of the events up to date. Could it be better? Of course it could be better, but we are in the system of racism, white supremacy. And until we replace that system with a system of justice, this is the best you gonna get. Now that's either true or it's not true. And I hope I have contributed to less confusion. And always remember, keep learning and stay codified.
And you're the prey. The prey. The prey. The prey.